You may recognize this guy if you have been to any of our Mucker growth sessions. But today, our guest expert is Tony Yang, the head of growth here at Mucker, and he is going to be digging into the buyer journey. And so without further ado, Tony, I'm just going to go ahead and hand it over to you.
All right. I guess this is how it feels when, like a late night talk show host gets one of their guests to be the host. Hopefully I won't disappoint you guys that are here. But I will say this topic of buyer journey frameworks is something that I've been speaking to many of our portcos, and I actually see some of these attendees, some familiar faces, and I know I've talked to some of you guys about this before. This is one of these topics and presentations I've done on a number of occasions through other channels or mediums, other conferences, and this is the first time I'm actually doing it for a Mucker webinar, even though I've talked to some of you individually about this. So this is going to be great. We're going to be putting this on our blog as well as on our founder portal. And I truly believe that this topic is extremely important for many of our portfolio companies as they're thinking about how to get beyond just doing, the same outbound messages that you see here. So as a transition, this slide is representative of very common scenarios that I have seen, experienced myself on the receiving end, as well as have also made the mistake of doing myself throughout my career. And so the one on the left, I think, again, I don't want to, disparage the efforts of our founders. A lot of our founders are just getting the outbound motion started and setting up. But as we talk about this buyer journey framework, I'll explain why, we're only getting 2, 3, 4% best in class reports of best in class companies doing outbound are seeing maybe 6 to 8% in terms of response rates. But that just basically means over 90% of people that you're reaching out to are not responding to you. And so why, right? So let's just go into these scenarios really quickly. Many of you guys are probably very familiar with it. First one on the left is an SDR, or, in many of our portco cases, our founders are sending out very similar outbound messages that says something like, hi, so-and-so, I work at this company, or I have founded this company. We do this. Maybe name drop any big name companies that you have as your existing customers, if you have any at all. Usually it's not, especially for early stage. And then hit them with a call to action of, I'd love to show you a demo. What does your schedule look like this week? We've all done this before. Again, we have to start somewhere for a lot of our founders, and that's great, but we have to graduate beyond this. And also, if you put yourself on the receiving end, I get 10 of these a day on LinkedIn and as well as email. I don't respond to any of those. The ones I do are because I'm actually interested and potentially in market, which we'll talk about in a second. Right. So that's the first scenario. Scenario number two, kind of also fairly common, even with our portfolio companies where, let's say either an AE or a founder was able to schedule a meeting, a demo, and the prospect showed up. Went through an hour-long demo covering everything and answered all the questions. We thought we knocked it out of the park. And then the prospect says, hey, why don't you reach out to me in 6 or 9 months from now, because I've got, other pressing things on my plate and I'm just too busy, right? We get, that on occasion, if not a lot. And so why? And what do we do about it? And then the last scenario is, again, a mistake that I made early on in my career as a demand gen marketer, growth marketer, basically just throwing MQLs over the wall to sales. And in the context of a founder, right, you could kind of take this as well, where perhaps you're running an ad on LinkedIn, offering an ebook or a report that you put together, some sort of lead magnet, right? It doesn't have to be on LinkedIn, but the whole point is, you got a key person at a target account to convert on some sort of content related call to action. Great, they're a great fit, but why did that not convert to the next stage, or why did that not become a deal? All right, so these are all different common scenarios, and the main thread amongst all these is we have not fully understood the buyer journey, where the prospects are. So this is something that I tell a lot of the founders I work with directly a lot, which is we've got our sales and marketing funnel. Great. We should be tracking things. It's, how we measure certain KPIs. It's also a way for us to establish certain workflows from, understanding how to work a prospect at a certain stage. And if we have other go-to-market team members like an SDR and an AE, how do they work together, right? The point that I want to make here is the funnel is not the same thing as the buyer journey. Okay. Ideally, they would be aligned, but in reality, they're not always aligned. But the fact is they're different. Okay. Again, the funnel is company focused. It's how we measure and track internally and establish workflows. The buyer journey, and let's be specific, the buyer journey in terms of the decision framework or decision-making process is buyer-centric. Okay. It's about how the prospects go about their decision-making process to even consider and purchase solutions such as yours. So again, these are two different things. Ideally, they would be aligned. So what do I mean about buyer journey decision frameworks? Here are a couple of examples. I'd say the most common one, especially if some of you who are listening to me today have a background in some sort of sales, some sort of marketing, background or work experience. Maybe you've heard of this concept of AIDA, awareness, interest, desire, action. Personally, I'm not a big fan of that kind of framework because the way it gets executed is often poor and incorrect. Where if we talk about awareness, a lot of companies just think, oh, let's just get our brand out there. Let's just buy a bunch of display ads. Let's sponsor every conference and get our logo up on the marquee or whatever, right? And that's not the point of the buyer journey decision. Understand the buyer journey. The one down here is one I come across that's better, but I think the one that at least the one that I've adopted throughout my career and the one that I've introduced to many of our portcos is one introduced by a company called Serious Decisions. If you haven't heard of Serious Decisions, they were probably close to 12, 13, 14 years ago. They were the company that actually defined or established the concept of the funnel, MQLs, SQLs. They actually were the ones that kind of spearheaded that whole concept. They were an analyst firm and they actually had another product marketing practice, which I was fortunate enough to be a client of. So I learned a lot of this from them early on in my career. They eventually got merged or acquired by Forrester, I think. Yeah. Forrester, not Gartner, they were acquired by Forrester. So they're part of Forrester now. But anyway, this framework is the one that I adopt, and I'll go a little bit more into the details. Again, this is not something I made up. All right. This is something that has been used and proven and tested by many forward-thinking, at least, back then, go-to-market teams. All right. So here's how we think about buyer journey decision frameworks. Many of our portcos, and I know several of you on the call right now on the Zoom webinar, I see your names. We do a pretty good job at identifying our product use cases. If we've done a little bit of homework, maybe we've identified benefits that our product features can deliver or value props to specific users or user types. What I've been working a lot with many of our portcos are to clearly identify our ICP, our ideal customer profile, as well as buyer personas. And just to set the baseline, in a B2B context, when I talk about ICP, we're talking about types of companies, type of organizations. The personas are the types of people, because you could have multiple personas you should be engaging with at a certain type of company, right? So very important to distinguish between those two type of entities. But the point being, we really have to understand and clearly define ICP and personas. And we have, for those of you in our portfolio, we have templates and worksheets and guides on how to do that. Okay. Now, the real trick is, how do you connect those two? Because a lot in my past experience, and before I even joined Mucker, I consulted and worked with many companies. And a lot of times when people do this and define their ICP and personas and, create a fantastic document with all these details and they got it all down, they either just have it published or they create some sort of cutout or poster on a wall, or it sits in a Google Drive somewhere, and it it dies there. Like nothing happens. Now, none of the ICP definitions or personas actually get used. And so in my opinion, the buyer journey framework is a great way to align, to bridge the gap between what you're providing in terms of features, benefits, value, what jobs to be done. That's what JTBD stands for in this case, to your specific ideal customer profile and buyer personas. All right. And so the buyer decision framework helps align the messaging for your audience and your offering. Okay, so here's a breakdown of this framework of the buyer journey by Serious Decisions. And again, I didn't make this up. I won't go into the specifics of each of these, but I'll just give you a high-level overview, okay? So stage one is loosening the status quo. The main goal for stage one is to make sure that your persona at an ICP or prospect understands the need. It doesn't have to be a pain point, because a need can be, a need to, if you're a fan of Andy Raskin, if you know who Andy Raskin is, he's a messaging expert who talked about, the greatest sales deck he's ever seen. He's talking about Zora. This was a viral post he did maybe a decade ago. If you guys haven't read it or seen it, go and Google Greatest Sales Deck Ever by Andy Raskin. Okay, so he talks about old world versus new world, right? So that's all about the why. Loosening status quo is all about informing the prospect about the why, right? Because they won't care about the how or the what until the why is established. If you guys listen to or have read Simon Sinek, he wrote a book about the why. When I was running teams in the house, every year I would make my team rewatch a YouTube clip of Simon Sinek's TED Talk, regardless of what you guys think about him. That was a fantastic TED Talk about the golden circle. Start with the why. Great companies talk about the why. And then, the next circle is about the how, and then the biggest circle about the what. We always, for whatever reason, early stage companies and those that are very, what's the word I'm looking for? When they, in the outbound context, right? A lot of companies who don't think about the buyer journey or don't think about, the prospect, they always lead with the what. We are this and we do this. Slightly better companies do say in outbound messages, I'm just picking on outbound as an example, we do this and we do it differently than these companies. Or, we're utilizing, AI or whatever to better accomplish this process. That's slightly better than what, right? But if we talk about and focus on the why first, I think that's where we're going to get much more traction and attention of our prospects, because we got to connect them to the business issue. So loosening status quo is all about informing about the why, not about your product, not about your solution. It's about the why in terms of why they need to address a problem, a need, a pain point, or why they need to change, hence loosening the status quo. Very important to understand that. Committing to change, again, I won't go into all the specific details. To summarize, it's about the why now, the urgency. Again, I talk a lot about this with our portfolio companies, which is, hey, if they understand the pain point, they got to also understand why they got to work on it or address that pain point now. Otherwise, you will get that response in scenario number 2, where you did a demo, right? Maybe they understood exactly what your product can do and solve for, but they're not committed to the urgency. If they were, they would not have said, hey, follow up with me 6 to 9 months from now. If it's an urgent pain point that they need to get fixed or addressed right away, they're going to say, hey, when can we talk about how do we roll this out to the rest of our team or our organization? They're committed to change at that point. They've been convinced of the urgency. So stage 1 and stage 2 is about the why and the why now. Again, still not talking about your product just yet. All right. Stage 3 and 4, in the interest of time, it's about, all right, now that I've convinced of the why and the why now, what are some ways or solutions that I can consider to address this need or this pain point or this, right, this the need to change and the need to do it now. This is where they start to think about, all right, how do I go about searching for possible solutions? And then committing to a solution is, all right, I found a solution or 2 or 3 that will meet my specific needs, and therefore I'm going to be considering them. Okay. And then 5 and 6 is about making the prospect feel good about making a decision to work with you or to become your customer. Okay. So that's a high level overview of this buyer journey decision framework in terms of the stages. One key takeaway I want to leave with you, and I'll give you an example in a second, is and I'll show you a template that our Mucker portfolio companies have access to. It's not yet published in our founder portal. Reach out to me or Britton if you are interested in getting that template. But to use this buyer journey decision framework, you have to write it from the perspective or the point of view from your prospect. Don't write it in terms of, hey, we're company A, B, and C. We help solve this problem. That's not the point. The point of this exercise is to really understand your personas and your ICP and to develop what are the key thoughts and statements they need to understand at each stage. And again, I'll show you an example. Okay, let me kind of change gears slightly and mention these two concepts that if you are in growth or in demand gen or sales, you may have heard of, which are demand creation and the demand capture. Okay. Let's start with demand capture. Demand capture is when you're getting the prospect to realize that your solution can solve for a pain or challenge that's already top of mind. You're capturing the demand that's already been there. They've already been convinced the why and why now. Okay. That's demand capture. If you think about it, a lot of the messages that is commonly sent, whether it's outbound emails or, marketing campaigns that are offering things like, running a LinkedIn ad for, to schedule a demo or to join a webinar, that's going to be a live walkthrough of your product. That's really demand capture in nature in terms of the focus, right? The reason, again, why many companies aren't responding to those kind of messages just yet is because demand has not yet been created. So demand creation is about getting the prospect to realize that there is an urgent pain, need, or challenge, or old world, new world scenario that they need to address or solve for today. That's what demand creation really is. Okay. And so important to understand the distinction between those two, because again, when we play out our go-to-market strategies and actually execute on certain tactics like outbound or advertising or organic social, a lot of times I see companies just default to this and they're expecting to get a bunch of, again, funnel and buyer journeys are different. They're trying to think about how do I get more top of the funnel leads? But they're talking about content or calls to action that are more geared towards this. And the buyers are not yet there. Okay. All right. So earlier I mentioned the buyer journey and the funnel are two different concepts. Ideally, they would be well aligned. In reality, they're not. When they're not aligned, the symptom or the outcome is low conversion rates. Okay. So this is a typical funnel. Okay. Every company in B2B would probably have their own definitions of what their funnel looks like. Some companies may not have, SAL, sales accepted lead. Some companies define SQL, sales qualified lead, as a stage one in their HubSpot deal stage, or whatever CRM they use, Pipedrive, Zoho, whatever. And some companies have different stages that I've seen. That's fine. That's how each company, as I mentioned, measure our own internal KPIs and how we track progress with prospects. Okay. Again, the buyer journey decision framework in terms of how prospects make a decision is a different concept. But if we can align them well, then we will most likely see higher conversion rates across each of your funnel stages. All right. So again, as I mentioned, the first two stages of the buyer journey framework that I adopt is focus on the why. Exploring possible solutions is really the what. And then the last three is more focused on the how. In order for a prospect to say yes to evaluating your solution and then expect them to convert down through all the stages to a closed one, they definitely must be convinced of the why. And the teams that are working on this, when I say teams for our founder, early stage companies, is the founder, right? It's you guys doing founder-led sales, founder-led marketing. You really have to do a great job at creating that demand by focusing in on the why and the why now, by convincing the prospect of the why and why now. And I don't know if you guys could see this on my screen, but there's, demand creation activity should not stop here. It should actually continue throughout the entirety of the funnel, as well as the buyer journey decision process, because it's always a good thing to reinforce the why and the why now. And let's be honest, because for enterprise type of sales, you're going to be talking to multiple types of personas. You may be bringing someone in at a later stage. Let's say the economic buyer of the buying committee at a certain company you're targeting. Maybe they're brought in that stage, deal stage 2. But you know what? This is your first interaction with that person, and that person has not been convinced of why. It's in your best interest to move the deal forward to convince that person of the why and why now. You can't just simply go into selling mode and social proof mode just yet, because they're not there yet. Okay, so demand creation and demand capture. All right, so the content or the topic of today's presentation is about using buyer journey frameworks to power your go-to-market strategy, or it's the secret to go-to-market strategy success. Here are several ways that buyer journey frameworks can be utilized. All right. So number one, and I'll walk through the examples of how to do this in subsequent sections. But number one, it helps with creating a message map across your ICP and personas through this concept of value statements. I'll give you an example shortly. Okay. But it's around message mapping, which is simply putting the right message in front of the right person at the right time. Right? We probably have heard that statement before, but how do we actually do it? Well, let's look at value statements and how to map that across each of your ICPs and personas. Okay. Secondly, buyer journey frameworks helps to baseline your content marketing strategy. And I'll explain a little bit about what that looks like in a second. Third, it kind of related to point number 2, we'll just call it out separately. It helps you create an outline for a nurture program. Okay. A lot of times I see companies think about nurture again as just simply hitting people over the head with stuff about their company. People don't care. Okay. It's about how do you convince them of each stage of the buyer journey. So you're bringing them along, you're actually nurturing them. A joke that we talk a lot about in the growth and marketing world is, if you heard of the term drip campaigns, right? We're trying to nurture. We're not trying to waterboard our prospects. Okay. So just kind of keep that in mind, because a lot of times I see companies waterboarding their prospects, just like forcing stuff about their company to these prospects, and they don't care. Okay. And then one last point I'll talk about in today's session is about lead scoring and MQL definitions. And this is probably more applicable to companies that are a little bit further along, where they have, like starting to think about implementing some sort of lead scoring model within their CRM or marketing automation, like HubSpot. Okay. And I'll show you a better way to do it. And, I've created tons of lead scores throughout my career. And I truly believe that using a buyer journey lead scoring model is the way to go, and how that can define or better define your marketing qualified lead criteria. Okay, let's jump in. All right, there's a lot of text on the slide. Let me walk you through and give you a high level overview. I won't go through every single one, but this is an example of a company that I worked with a while ago, where, just for context, this company was an RPA solution, robotics process automation. So similar to like a UiPath, if you're familiar with that kind of company, but it was a startup. And as I mentioned before, in terms of, value prop and ICPs, they understood their use case as well. One of their core use cases was they can sell to heads of people, those in their HR role, for a use case around new hire onboarding. Okay. And so that you could, see that their ICPs are early stage, fast growing startups. You can kind of get an idea of how they define their ICPs, and I work with them on defining these. The persona for a head of people include job titles similar to like a director of HR, head of talent, and part of their objectives was onboarding new hires, right? So this is a new hire onboarding use case for process automation. Again, this was way before AI and stuff like that. That probably has changed that category. Value statements. I mentioned the term value statements in previous slides. What a value statement really is a key thought that you want to impart within your prospect at that particular stage to convince them of the goal for that stage. As an example, right, loosening status quo is about convincing of the need or pain point, the need to change what they're currently doing today. And committing to change is about why they should do it now, not 9 months from now. Okay, so if they're trying to reach a head of people persona at an ICP that looks like this, a value statement that they want to put into this person's, psyche, into their understanding is this: current onboarding processes takes too long. And this affects our new hires' time to productivity, new employee experience, our company culture, how we do recruiting, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So if I'm a head of person at a 200 person, company, and we just raised a large Series A or Series B round, the why is this, because I'm in charge of new hire onboarding. The why now is this: we are planning for 80 new headcount this quarter. Okay. If we don't improve our onboarding process, new hires will feel in the dark, unvalued, not ready to contribute. This will lead to higher turnover. Okay, just for simple math's sake, let's just say I work at a 160 person startup. Okay, we raised a massive round. We're going to be aggressive in hiring for this next quarter, 80 new people. So we're increasing our company size by 50% within 3 months. Okay, that is a major why, and why now for someone who is in charge of, making sure we're recruiting the right people. Not only that, but they're set up for success, that their time to productivity is shortened and they can hit the ground running, and that there's no high turnover. Another loosening status quo and committing to change could be, hey, every, new employee that turns over or leaves the company within 3 months is actually detrimental to the company by this amount of, I don't know how much money that's worth, or capital that's wasted, or time, or whatever, right? So these are two examples of value statements for this persona at each of these stages. Notice, one, again, it's written from the perspective of the prospect, and two, these two stages so far, these two value statements have nothing to do with robotics process automation, let alone this company's features, benefits, tools, etc. Not yet. Okay. So that's the first two, why and why now. And then again, I won't read through all of these, but if I'm a head of people at this kind of company, if I am convinced of these two, then I need to have an understanding that, hey, there are solutions out there that could improve our new hire onboarding process. There are automation solutions that could take care of a lot of the manual and menial tasks that my team today is, burdened with doing, right? Things like signing these papers and, walking people through, how to set up their HR benefits and all that stuff, right? And so is there a better way to do that where it could be sped up? Great. Okay, I'm convinced that there's a better tool or a set of tools for that. Well, now I heard of this particular company, Acme. I'm just, again, this is a fictitious name, but this company is actual real company I work with. And so they're at this stage, this is where the value proposition will land. Okay. Our company, or this company, again, the prospect should be realizing this. This company that I just heard about can uniquely meet our needs by automating certain backend processes. They connect to these systems that we are actually using. The way that our workflow and process looks like this, and it could be transferred into this particular use case, okay? Or a particular product, and this is how you set up their flow to support this, okay? So here's a path forward. Justifying and making the selection help me make me feel like I'm making the right choice, which is, all right, if I decide to go with this particular solution, maybe I shortlisted three other solutions out there. Well, with Acme, I could tell, and I have proof points that we can reduce our new employee onboarding from 9 days to 3 minutes for this section of the onboarding process. That's a huge benefit or huge win for us, right? And it allows our existing team, my team, hiring managers to focus on other things, building relationships, other stuff like that, provides a lot of value. And hey, I also learned that they work with another similar company like us in terms of stage, makeup, infrastructure, blah, blah, blah. Okay. I feel pretty good about saying yes to this company. All right. So this is an example of establishing value statements to convince buyers of each stage, what the goals of each stages are. Okay. So this is a message map. This is what I mean by a message map. If you can identify the right value statements to the right prospects at the right stage, that's how you're going to guide them down your funnel to get them to say yes. Now, the tricky part is then how do we implement this, which we'll talk about in a second. One last comment on this slide. You can have multiple value statements for each stage. And so, yeah, you can have multiple ones. I'll show, this is an example. Again, the text is too small to read. The point isn't to actually show you what it says, but this is an example of a document that you would want to put together to identify the value statements. And you would do it for each persona at each ICP. This is for another company that I worked with. It was related to sales contact data. So a competitor to, let's say, a Zoom info. Okay. By the way, as I mentioned before, if you're a Mucker portfolio company, you will have access to a template within our founder portal. I don't think it's there yet, but we'll put it there soon. If you want it, email me or Britton, we'll get you access to it. But this was a document that I worked on with this other company. Again, they were later stage. There were 800 employees global. They were scale stage, raised, large round. I spent probably 2 or 3 months with them on this, just putting together this document, working with various members of their go-to-market teams or CR head of customer success, talking to their SDR managers and teams. This document ended up being 40 pages for them because they've got like 5 different personas across different ICPs. So it made sense to work on that for that period of time. Again, like we worked on one part of it, we took it and then we started to implement it across various parts of our organization. But again, I'm not telling our portfolio companies that you have to create a 40-page document, but I will say that you want to get very specific for each persona and each ICP. Okay, that's the takeaway here. Okay. Earlier, I mentioned that doing this exercise can also help with identifying the baseline for your content marketing strategy. And so this is how it can be utilized. So once we've clearly identified the value statements aligned to a particular buyer journey stage and aligned to certain ICPs and personas, what I would typically recommend for our companies is let's take an inventory of your existing content that you have available that's public facing. It could be blog posts. It could be, ebooks and white papers. It could be case studies. It could be webinar recordings and other video content. Doesn't matter. It could even be specific pages on your website. Put it into a spreadsheet. And again, for Mucker Portcos, we have a templated spreadsheet that you can use, a Google Sheet. But you essentially do an audit of all your content. And then what you want to do is you would want to align each content to a persona and ICP. And the role is you could have a piece of content speak to multiple personas and even multiple ICPs, but you only want to identify what buyer journey stage does it do a good job at reinforcing the value statements for, okay? For simplicity's sake, the buyer journey framework that I utilize has 6 stages. I tend to just group the first 2 together, the next 2 together, and the last 2 together because the first 2 is about the why and why now, right? The second 2 is about the how and the what, like basically product marketing related messaging. The last two, 5 and 6, is more about ROI, proving value, proof points, and even case studies. Case studies will do very well at that part of the buyer journey. So I generally bucket buyer journey stages 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, 6 together. So when you're doing this content audit, you're putting into a sheet all your content assets, who it could potentially speak to, what type of ICPs, and then make identify what buyer journey bucket does it do a good job at reinforcing. And then I like to apply some sort of, again, this is very subjective, an effectiveness rating of how well it reinforces the value statements at that particular stage. How you would do this is whoever has the best understanding of persona and ICP, go skim through the content and ask yourself, all right, does this do a good job at supporting this value statement or these set of value statements in buyer journey 1, 2, or 3, 4? I just do it on a scale of 1 to 10. So when you do this, okay, you have a full spreadsheet that's cataloging and mapping each of your content to a buyer journey stage for certain personas and ICPs. You then run a pivot table. And if you don't know how to run a pivot table, there's probably tutorials out there. Those of you who are port pros that I work with, just ask me. I'll show you. It's not hard. When you run a pivot table, you're basically able to identify for each persona and even each ICP, how many pieces of content do you have lined up for each buyer journey stage bucket for that particular persona ICP? This does two things, okay? One, it identifies content gaps. As you can see here for this example, they only have 4 pieces of content speaking to the revenue operations leader persona for buyer journey stages 1 and 2. They don't have any for buyer journey 5 and 6 stages, okay? So if you're engaged with a RevOps leader at a late stage deal, and you could see or you could tell that this person should be already convinced the why and why now, they need to be convinced of, make me feel good about going with your solution. You need to develop content for that particular persona to put in front of that person because they're at that stage, okay? So one, it identifies gaps in content where you could then go to your content marketing or content person, or, if you're early stage founder, like many of the company founders I talk to, go and find your contractor to write content, or you yourself talk about that particular piece of content or topic, record yourself. We have playbooks around how to scale your content, record yourself, transcribe it, turn it into a blog post or whatever format, right? The point is you want to address certain gaps in content. That's number one. Number two, we talked about nurture program. This basically outlines your nurture strategy, okay? So if you have, let's say, a HubSpot as a marketing automation tool, in this case, you have 19 pieces of content that does a pretty good job. And again, you can even filter it by effectiveness rating, that do a great job convincing the why and why now. You should use this content to create a nurture program, not a waterboarding program, a nurture program using a HubSpot where you're essentially nurturing or dripping these content. Start with your best content that does a good job at loosening status quo and committing to change. Week 1, week 2, week 3, right? Like this is how you structure a nurture program in let's say a HubSpot. Once they've been consuming content in this buyer journey bucket, you could transfer them to your mid buyer journey nurture program, offering these 4 pieces of content. So again, this is how you actually structure a nurture program that brings people along, not just bashing over the head with content about your company. Okay, so now, how do you do this? Let's transition really quickly, and I'm cognizant of time. Lead scoring and MQLs. Okay, so this is, funny meme. It's funny because it's true, which is, if, again, thinking back in my early days of my career when I was running marketing automation and setting lead scoring and working with sales team, I've made this mistake many times where, maybe not necessarily in the way it's outlined here, but the way that I define an MQL was around stuff like, hey, did this person click on an email? Did this person visit, a website, add 5 points, whatever, right? And then when they reach a certain threshold, I toss them over to our sales team and says, hey, look, I just generated 20 MQLs for you last week, or 100 MQLs for you last month. And then the salespeople are trying to follow up, and over time they learn, yeah, these MQLs, they suck. They never turn into a deal. Okay. Again, that was an experience at larger startups, Series A, Series B companies. But the same concept can be applied to you early stage founders, where maybe you're thinking about running ads, or you're thinking about, offering content. And then you're kind of expecting that lead who engaged with one content to convert to a deal. All right. That's unrealistic because they have not yet been convinced of the why and why now. All right. So how do we do that? How do we convince them? Part of the answer was in nurturing, right? Identifying the right content to support value statements and nurture them along. Going back to lead scoring, the point of lead scoring is not to identify prospects who are sales ready. That's really not the goal. The goal is to identify prospects that are a great fit and where they potentially are in their buyer journey. It's hard, you can't read someone's mind, obviously, in terms of how they're making the decisions, but you can look for clues in terms of content that they're consuming, right? The clues aren't based in the activity of a click or the activity of hitting your web page. It's around the content that they're consuming, right? And the content related to the value statements is supposed to be reinforcing for a particular buyer journey stage. That's how you want to structure your lead scoring. I won't go through all these bullet points, but the main thing I want to talk about for the rest of today's time is setting up a lead scoring model in, let's say, your HubSpot. You should have, scores that identify fit, but you should also base your lead score off of behaviors, not on generic activities like I just mentioned around, hey, they clicked on a blog post, but on specific blog posts, not on, clicking on an email or attending a webinar, but on a specific webinar. Okay. And so this is how we play it out. I routinely would recommend our portfolio companies, if they're ready for setting up a lead scoring model, set up 3 different fields. Okay. One would be ICP. Okay. So we call it a company grade. Again, ICP is based around type of organization. Are they, a great fit? If a company is doing a target account or ABM model, then we would say, hey, let's identify them as a tier 1. Again, it doesn't have to be a target account or tier 1. You just have to identify certain criteria that makes, a company a better fit than others. Okay. So I would always recommend an ICP grade or company grade. I would always recommend a persona grade. And again, actually how it plays out is not necessarily a persona grade, but just a simple drop-down menu that looks for common job titles that aligns to a particular persona. Because the point of these two together is that you want to find is the right person at the right type of company. Okay. You can have the right person, but at a wrong fit company, and vice versa. You want to find the right fit for both. Again, there's strategies if you find right company, but the wrong persona, how to address that. We could talk about that separately or one-on-one with any of our portcos. But the grade, you want to identify those two. The activity then should be based around a set of 3 scores, actually 3 different fields. For simplicity's sake, I just tell our portcos, bucket buyer journey 1, 2 together, 3, 4 together, and 5, 6 together. So how it plays out is, let's say in your HubSpot, you have 3 activity lead scores labeled with these names. Okay. Then when you set up the criteria for scoring, you then apply points to a particular stage if it reinforces that particular stage. Okay. So if you have a nurture program and people are clicking on content, these 19 pieces of content, you're identifying which clicks or which web page visits to these 19 pieces for buyer journey stage 1 to a marketing leader, okay, in the buyer journey 1, 2 score. This is very important, okay? You actually call out the specific content pieces, right? And so over time, what you're going to see is a set of 3 scores. This is, again, an example, okay? This particular lead has buyer journey score 1 to 30 points, 3, 4, 20 points, and 30 points. Round numbers, because I think they added this particular instance of HubSpot, they just said 10 points for certain pieces of content. How you build it is within your, again, this is deep into HubSpot. Again, if you have someone else helping you with HubSpot, they'll know how to do this, or you could look up, some tutorials. You're basically creating custom fields in HubSpot or lead score that says, look for any clicks on or page views of content that contains, in this case, there's the one way of doing it is adding BJS1-2. Do it whatever way you want, but like in this case, adding it to the URL. So it designates a piece of content as buyer journey 1-2 score. Okay. Another common way that I've seen people implement it is actually have a running list of actual URLs of content that aligns to buyer journey score 1-2. And they just keep adding to it as they continue to create more content. Okay. So again, the point is to align the activity score against a buyer journey model in terms of what content they're consuming, not type of content, but the actual content topic itself. And then the way that I define an MQL is if company grade and persona checks out, they are the right person at the right company, and if they hit buyer journey stages 1 and 2 above a certain threshold. Just start with a certain, estimate, like, hey, if it's 10 points for each of these pieces of content, if they hit 50 points, maybe meaning that they read, 5 of these pieces of content for buyer journey score stage 1 and 2, they've been convinced of losing status quo and committing to change. Therefore, they're ready to talk to a sales rep to engage in a sales conversation. That's how I define an MQL. Okay, pro tip, you could do roll-ups. If you're further along and are adopting an ABM strategy, you're basically rolling up activity scores to the deal and company records and, persons known. And that's it. I just went through a lot of very dense and rich content in 45 minutes. So hopefully you guys got the main idea of buyer journeys.
Excellent. And if there are any questions in the last couple minutes here, someone did reach out about whether these slides will be available, and they will be part of what we post in the blog post along with the full recording here. So you can go back and slow Tony down and capture all the rich content that he just gave you. Any questions? Got the Q&A open. You can go ahead and type it in the Q&A. In the meantime, I want to let y'all know that our next, well, first of all, thank you, Tony, for all of this. This is fantastic. We've got our next growth webinar is going to be on Wednesday, October 2nd. And we've got Debbie Rossler coming in from Birkeland, and she is going to talk through what you need to be doing now in planning your financial modeling for next year. So, all right, we've got some questions. Tony, has anything changed about how you think about content marketing?
Anything changed about how I think about content marketing?
Let's see. And Melissa, is there any, oh, and best channels and touch points. Got it.
Is that related to that same question?
Hold on. This came in 4 different parts. Okay, so has anything changed about how you think about content marketing and best channels and touch points in an era of AI?
Oh, okay. So one, we did a great session that just got published on our blog on interesting use cases of Gen AI tools for growth hacks and stuff like that. Go check it out. It's really good. And we'll probably do more of this in the future as well. In terms of the channels, like I haven't found a tool. Maybe there is one out there that you know of that helps me identify the right channels to utilize. I think the question is, if you're trying to find out what channels to utilize to reach your audience, it really has to do with just the first principles of understanding your ICP and personas. Part of that understanding your personas is how do they go about learning? Where do they go for information? How do they make decisions and evaluate solutions, or even go and find solutions? Do they typically go to their colleagues in a Slack community? Do they follow certain people on LinkedIn? Do they go to G2? Different places like that, right? And so I think the answer to that question should be really around a solid understanding of your persona and essentially your persona. If you're asking about AI tools to help for certain channels like outbound and outreach, yes, there are plenty of tools like that. There are tools that help with things like optimizing your advertising. There's tools, there's a lot of these AI tools out there. Again, that's more about, at least in my opinion, how do you utilize these tools more efficiently? But the identifying of what channels to utilize still has to be around, how you think about. I hope that answers the question.
Related to that, is there a way to do that when there's too much content out there? We're just seeing such volume that's being generated.
Yeah, there is, and especially with LLMs out there that produces content at scale, and like on one hand, we have told our portcos to try to utilize ChatGPT or other Gen AI tools to create content, but there's a lazy way to go about it, and there's a much more better way to go about it. I won't go into all the specifics of AI and how LLMs are trained, but I think there are, again, like certain tools that help you get maybe 70% of the way there. But I think part of what I've just mentioned around the why and why now should be about how you think about the market, what makes you a thought leader in your space. And that, I feel like there's not, I don't think any LLM solution can really do that, because it's your expertise, your voice. LLMs are trained on the data that's out there. It's not, your expertise, if that makes sense, right? So again, this is where you really have to apply your understanding, how you view the world, and convince people about the old and new world, right? Like, and that's the challenge, but that's also a way for you to differentiate and establish yourself as a thought leader. I hope that answers that question.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Tony.
Thanks.